Polls will close in the UK election and there's reports of a record voter turnout. Let's go live to my co-host Laura Jays, who is in London for us this morning. Laura, the leaders have cast their votes early. What's the latest?
Votes early and millions of Britons have done so by now. As you say, Pete, there's reports, some anecdotal evidence and some insider advice that there is a record turnout. To give you an idea, the last election in 2017 in June, there was around 70% voter turnout. So if there's a record turnout this time around, it'll be more than that. I want to bring in now a former Labor Party advisor, John McTernan. He was Labor Party advisor in Australia once upon a time, but more recently here in the UK. John McTernan, good to see you.
Good to see you.
A record voter turnout, is that what you're hearing, and what will that mean?
It is what I'm hearing, and it means that really people see this as another chance to vote on the big issue of Remain versus Leave. The referendum had the biggest turnout in British electoral history. The last election felt like a second run at it. This is the third run at it, and the question is who's got together their votes the closest? Have the Tories got enough Brexit votes, or have Labour and the Liberal Democrats voted tactically enough to actually take some seats from the Tories? And there's some interesting challenges around, there's some interesting rumours about who is and isn't under threat.
We'll get to those rumours in a moment, but let's talk about the record turnout and what it means for the youth vote. Labor seems to be pretty buoyed by this record turnout at the moment. Is that a little premature, do you think?
Well, Labour's always believed that if everybody voted, young and old, then they'd have a huge advantage, because Labour have a massive lead among younger people, but older people are 4 times more likely to vote than younger people. Without compulsory voting, you really require a big turnout operation, and Labour's social media in the last few days has been targeted on young people. There's a big effort to get them to check they were registered, to register to vote, then to get out to vote. And it does seem, I had to queue this morning to vote at 7 o'clock when my booth is open, so that's just a little bit of evidence that there's a lot of people wanting to go and vote. There's
some concern as well with inside the Tory party that Boris Johnson may be at a real risk of losing his own seat, John Howard style.
Yeah.
Do you think that's likely, or is that a bit of I guess
reverse psychology?
Psychology.
I think there's a genuine chance, because, like John Howard, his seat has changed ethnically. And one thing about our election this time round is that there's been huge polarisation on ethnic grounds, and so black and Asian voters are far less likely to vote Tory even than they were at the last election. So if his seat has been changing demographically, changing against him, it's entirely possible, and there's been a lot of effort put there. It's all about the tactical vote. If people can give up the Liberal Democrat vote and vote Labour just to get rid of, we could see that Labour came close before in that seat back in the 90s. And I'm also hearing that Dominic Raab in Esher, in southwest of London, he's under threat, and again, that's the Liberal Democrats this time who are mobilising the Labour vote, which appears to be collapsing. So there could be some very tight elections. Whatever the exit poll comes out as, the devil will be in the detail.
Well, just last night, the Liberal Democrat leader really did a bit of a backflip, saying that she would support Labor if Jeremy Corbyn goes. Yeah. What does that tell you? Does that tell you that the Lib Dems are more confident about how they've gone today, and that they are willing to do a deal to get themselves into power somehow?
Oh, it tells me in a way she's desperate for attention, that the small party always needs attention the day before voters cast their vote. So there's relevance, deprivation going on there. And there's also, the honest truth is, small parties have no negotiating power unless they're willing to support both sides. Joe Swinson, Nicola Sturgeon have both said they won't put Boris Johnson back in number 10. That means they have to support Jeremy Corbyn. No conditions, otherwise they're supporting Johnson, and they've said they won't.
You once said the best thing Jeremy Corbyn can do for the Labor Party is resign. Do you think we're about to see the end of his political career tonight?
Well, if the numbers are the same as most opinion polls say, with nearly a 10-point lead for the Tories, Labour down to 220, 230 seats, that's a massive setback for the Labour Party. One of the worst defeats since 1983, and that was the second worst defeat in the party's history. So he'd really have to resign. But there's one thing about Jeremy we know is he wouldn't resign when the shadow cabinet resigned. He wouldn't resign when almost all his colleagues voted no confidence against him. He doesn't act like a normal politician. Doesn't feel like a normal politician.
Even if he loses tonight, he could still dig in.
Well, he'll dig in his heels until he gets he can see a route to his successor, his chosen successor, and he'll want to guarantee that before he goes, because Corbynism is not a project for running the UK. It's a project actually for taking over the Labour Party and turning it into a far left party. That's not secure until he has a successor who is just like him politically.
Wow, okay, so do you think that there will be any introspection about Labor's promises, the manifesto, the huge socialism attempt at socialising the UK economy?
I think there will be introspection. I think it will be very short. It'll be, we weren't left-wing enough. I think we've had in 2015, that was the feeling after Miliband. No, we weren't left-wing enough. 2017, no, we weren't left-wing enough. This time, no, we weren't left-wing enough. I think
it's been such a change from the Tony Blair days when you were advising him. How did that trajectory get to this point?
Well, you have to say Iraq. Iraq was a big disruptor, even though Tony won a substantial election victory after the Iraq War. And also, being in government, everybody in any political party knows this, your activists, your members, even sometimes your elected representatives, get tired of the compromise of governing, and they like the purity of making demands that may not be fulfillable, but at least there's no compromise in them. And I think it's that at the moment the Labour Party still decided not to compromise with the electorate. You have to be defeated again and again until you accept that fact.
Just finally, John, you've seen Australian politics up close, and you've certainly seen British politics up close. There's things here that have happened in this campaign. There's promises being made that would just never fly in Australia. Why the difference? Why the huge leap between the two countries in that sense?
I think compulsory voting forces both political parties to the centre ground. They have to compete for centre ground voters. And I think we're in a very strange situation where both parties have been taken over by the populist extremes, the populist left in Labour and the populist right in the Tory party. So if there were the return of a Tony Blair style figure, the underserved part of politics in the UK is actually a centrist one. But I mean, I agree with you. Can you imagine what would happen if Scott Morrison had hidden in a fridge so as not to speak to a Sky News reporter? How would that have gone down?
It would never happen. John McTernan, quite a sobering assessment of the current situation. Really appreciate your time. We'll be speaking to you again soon. So, Pete, there you go. We've got under 2 hours to go. Tactical voting has been will have a huge influence on this election. We'll keep an eye on Boris Johnson's seat, but also the seats farther afield out of London. The Red Wall, where Labor has these 50 or 60 strongholds, that, of course, is where the Conservatives need to make some inroads.
Sky News all morning for more on the Brexit election, and be sure to join us from 9 o'clock Eastern, just over an hour away, when polls close and our rolling coverage of the results begins.